Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on CELPIP Live. Let's dive right into the episode with our trivia question. Canada has 5 different colored banknotes. What are the colors? Let me know the answers in the comments below. You can also share this image and your answer on Instagram with the hashtag CELPIP Live, and we may feature it on our feed. I will, of course, reveal the response towards the end of our segment. For now, let's begin. YouTube series made to help CELPIP test takers understand more about the CELPIP test. So if you're about to write the test, please subscribe to our channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as we go live. In today's episode, Brandy will be reviewing errors that we commonly make in the writing section. If your test is closed, this episode is a great opportunity to make note of those errors and, excuse me, to make note of those errors to avoid during your test. Let's begin. Hi, Brandy. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm very well, thanks. It's nice to see you again. It seems like a very long time that I've been here, so I'm happy to be back.
Yes, we definitely have missed you. So thank you for being here today and then sharing your wisdom with us. I'm going to let you get started right away.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen so we can get this show on the road, as we say. So yes, we're here today to talk about some common writing mistakes that sometimes we make in general, but also specifically on the CELPIP test. So today we're going to look at a real test question from a past CELPIP test. We're also going to look at 3 different answers that test takers have given to that exact question. And together, I'm hoping we can identify what some of those weaknesses are. We're going to talk about how we can fix them to improve the score. So before we read over that practice question today, I'd like to just quickly review how the score is generated on the test itself. So the raters are looking for you to demonstrate 4 particular skill sets. These are the 4 categories here that you see before you. So the first thing they want to see is your content ideas and the coherence or organization. So basically, they're hoping you can make several main points, and for each point you have, you're supporting that with specific examples. And hopefully, too, it's organized with a clear beginning, middle, and end. The vocabulary is also important. So the raters are hoping that you're showcasing a nice variety of words. We don't just want to repeat the same phrase over and over. Hopefully we've got a nice suitable range, and that the words, again, are used accurately and are used for a purpose. They have to suit the task that you're writing about. Readability is the 3rd category. And this is really how easy it is for the reader to make sense of what you've written on the page. So you can make the reader's job so much easier if you start your sentences with a capital letter, finish them with an end punctuation mark. So that's the first thing we need to make sure we're doing. The next step, of course, is to paragraph appropriately. So on the CELPIP test, you're usually asked to talk about several different things in that email question in task 1. So we really should not be submitting one giant paragraph as our answer. Each time we have a new main point to make, we should have a new paragraph on the page. And again, that will help your reader figure out when your ideas are beginning and ending and so on. Now, grammar and writing are also included under this category too. Task fulfillment is the final thing the raters will assess. So they're looking to see how completely you've answered the question. So if there were, say, 3 points in the question that you were asked to talk about, the raters want to see that you've actually addressed each of those points within the body of your writing itself. Your tone is important too. So we need to make sure that we know who we're writing to and that we're being formal or casual in the right context. Word count's the final thing that they're going to look at. So on the CELPIP writing test, you're always asked to write between 150 and 200 words. So all of those things will be taken into account under that final category. So here's our practice question today. When you take the CELPIP test for task 1, this is the email question that you'll be asked to complete, you're always going to have a little bit of background information first. So I'm going to read out loud what you see before you on the screen. This was once a real question, as I say. So let's just think about what this question is asking us to do. So it says here that you've just come home from the grocery store and realized you were overcharged for several items that were supposed to be cheaper. You called the store and were told that you had to come back in today to fix it. The store is an hour drive away. All right, so we read that on the test first. We sort of make note of those points. And here are the instructions. So the test asks us to email the store manager, reminds us again of the word count. So we need to write between 150 and 200 words. There is a word counter right on the screen, so you'll know when you've achieved that word count minimum. And in the email, the test takers were asked to do these 3 things. They first had to explain the problems with the items that they purchased. So remember, they were overcharged for several grocery items. So that's the first point to make. Secondly, they had to explain why they simply couldn't return to the store today. Remember, in the test question, we live so far away, an hour away from the store, that it's not possible. So we need to address that at some point in the email. And finally, we have to describe how we would like the manager to resolve the problem. So most of us would probably want a refund, but the test taker themselves would have to come up with some sort of a logical solution and write about it in the email. So I'm going to show you now the first response of 3. Here it is, all right? You can see at the top, I've already told you what score that they achieved on the test. So this person submitted this exact answer, word for word, exactly like you see it. They earned a level 8 for this response on the CELPIP test. So level 8 indicates a good score. That's what level 8 means, good proficiency in the English language. So there are several strengths here, but what I'm going to ask you to do right now, please, is to skim read it. Can you take about 10 or 15 seconds even? Read the response over quickly and try to identify which of those 4 areas you think is the most obvious mistake that we should fix. So remember, we talked about content, vocabulary, the readability or structure, and then the task fulfillment. So again, take about 10-15 seconds. If you want to start typing ideas into the live feed box, you certainly can. Ashwati maybe will share some of those ideas if they come in, but we will discuss together in a moment. Okay, so I'm hoping you've had some time to skim it over. I'm going to review again the 4 categories that the raters are looking for. And I'm wondering if you do have any suggestions. Think about which dimension is the weakest. So again, I can't see the live feed because I've got my PowerPoint on my screen. But if there are any ideas there, Ashwati, maybe you can share them.
Hi. So I just want to let, if you're watching, just keep throwing in your ideas. I will be sharing them. I have one right now, Randy. It's from Alexia. She says that in the sample, it's written, "I did call your store" instead of "I called your store."
Okay, so you're focusing on a little tiny detail. I agree with you. I think that's something I would fix. I'm looking at a bigger picture idea. There's something, even if you don't read the words on the screen, even if it was in a different language you're not familiar with, you should notice immediately that there's something wrong with this particular response and the way it's formatted. So again, here are your categories. Hoping I'm pushing you towards the right direction.
Oh, I'm very curious now.
All right, so looking at these 4 options, if your eyes are landing on the 3rd item down, this is the readability factor. So let's blow that up into greater detail. So these 4 items are more detailed descriptions of what raters are looking for here when they read over your work.
So Nilesh has a suggestion here. He says it's a paragraph.
Yes, thank you so much. That's exactly the answer I was hoping for. This is key. Formatting and paragraphing is the very first thing we want to make sure we get under control. Because again, if you're submitting one giant paragraph to the reader, you're making the reader do a tremendous amount of work. They have to sift through and figure out when one idea finishes and the next idea begins. And the last thing you want to do on your test is make the raters work really hard to understand what it is you're saying. So again, this is what the initial response did look like. So we have no paragraphing. It's just one giant blob is what I like to call that. So really to fix this, we simply need to understand where the paragraph breaks will happen. It's actually not that hard to fix. We're not even going to worry about the grammar and writing mistakes now. We just need to figure out how many paragraphs we should have as a starting point to improve this response. So once again, here was the test instruction. There were 3 points listed, those 3 bulleted points. And I think if we look at them together now, that first point that asks you to explain about the problems with the items, that would make for a very succinct first paragraph. You know, when you start writing anything, you always give the purpose for writing in the beginning. So if we did our introduction in the email talking about the problems with the food items, that would make for a very effective opening paragraph. I think when we look at these 2 next points, explaining why we can't go to the store and then asking for a solution, I would suggest that those 2 ideas are somewhat related. They're a cause and effect situation. So if we said to the manager, you know, I live an hour away, I can't make it back to the store today, but I can gladly come tomorrow and perhaps we can talk about my refund then. So those 2 ideas, they go together. I think it would be perfectly fine to talk about them in a second paragraph, but we should have a distinction on the page. You should see the problems first. There will be a space and a brand new paragraph that talks about the rest of the issues here. Now, in an email, remember, there's usually a very brief conclusion. Sometimes it's 1 sentence that just summarizes what we're talking about, and we should have a sign-off at some point. So I would suggest for this exact question, a 3-paragraph structure should do the trick. So again, this is what was initially submitted. I think the ideas are pretty good, but once we separate those ideas into proper paragraphs, this is what we're supposed to have. So again, it's the only correction we made. We've not changed any words, we've not changed any grammar. So now we have the corrected version of the paragraph. That first paragraph, if you skim it over now, you'll see she's mentioning about the items, the problems with those items. Again, that big middle paragraph explains she can't come back today, she wants to come back tomorrow, and hopefully they'll have a refund then. There's 1 sentence at the very end that acts as that concluding remark, and it's just a thank you to the manager for helping to resolve the problem. So it's very customary to finish off an email with a polite tone like this. It's very respectful. And then you see the person's name here, which is Lynn. So we've fixed the paragraphing structure, much better. Now there's one other tiny little thing here. We can call it writing error 2, and it has to do with the format of the email specifically. So I'm going to place a little red arrow on the screen where there's something missing. So between this concluding sentence and our signature, when we're writing an email, we should have what's called a sign-off. It can simply be 1 word, maybe a couple of words at most. So one of the most common sign-offs we can include, at least in the Canadian context, is this word sincerely. If you use that word, you can apply it to pretty much any email that you write in this business sort of situation. So sincerely shows respect. It's an appropriate tone. So you notice the structure? You've got your concluding sentence, a space, you've got your sign-off, another space, and then the signature. So this is exactly how an email should be structured in the real world as well as on the CELPIP test. Now, I don't want to spend too much time talking about sign-offs and greetings, but I do a lot of webinars with test takers like yourselves, and I always get a ton of questions asking about what would be an appropriate sign-off and not. So I'd like to take about 3 or 4 minutes to quickly go over the do's and don'ts of your email sign-offs and greetings. So I'll give you just a few here, maybe 4, that are very common in Canadian context. So you could use any of these words for pretty much any email, and it would be considered appropriate in tone. So we've got sincerely, regards, and you can add a couple of words like kind regards or best regards. So when you're using these, you'll notice the structure. We always have a capital letter to start. If you're using a second word, there's no need to put a capital there. The capital only comes right there. And you'll notice there's a comma right at the end of every single sign-off phrase that you're using. So this is the correct way to do so. There are a couple of sign-offs that I have noticed in past sample writings from past tests that you would not want to use. So here's a few examples. So if we say things like faithfully yours or God bless, these create an inappropriate tone, at least in the Canadian context. They indicate almost too much of an intimacy. And it's just not appropriate to be addressing, particularly a manager of a store who you probably have never met before. So we don't want to use these words. We'd rather go with the more acceptable list above. Sincerely or regards, again, tend to be the most common. Okay, now we've talked about the sign off, and in this particular email, we needed to add one in. So we fixed that now. In this email that was submitted, our test taker already gave us a correct greeting. So Lynn actually addressed this for the attention of the manager. So this works for this particular question. It's absolutely appropriate. So we don't have to fix anything there. But again, I'd like to just quickly go over some of the formats for how you would greet somebody in an email, because I know I'll get lots of questions about this at the end. So if we follow this structure, if we know the person's name to whom we're writing, we're always going to start with that word dear. Then we're going to put a title word and then the last name, not the first name, the last name. So again, if you look at the structure, we always start the word dear with a capital letter. This is what we mean by title words. So this short form means doctor. Mr. stands for a man. Ms., we pronounce that like a Z, so Ms. This stands for a woman, and then professor down here as well. So all of the title words have a capital. You'll notice if it's a short form, we put a period. We don't need a period there because we've just written the whole word, so this is okay. And then every time we address the person by name, it's the last name, not the first name. And names we know have capital letters. Now, if you're looking really closely, you might notice that the end punctuation is just a little bit different depending on the example. So up here at the top, we have what's called a colon. This is a dot dot. So the colon is here and down here as well. We use this colon when we're addressing an email in a more formal context. So in this case, we're writing to a professor, and up here, it's a doctor. So those are perhaps more elevated methods of communication there. So a colon would be appropriate, I would say. If we're addressing a man or a woman, a comma as well is perfectly acceptable. This just means it's not quite as formal. So you can use either, they are acceptable. And I will say, I want to reassure our viewers that these little tiny structural things I'm pointing out, it's great to know how to do this correctly, but on your CELPIP test, it's not an enormous problem. If you forget your end punctuation mark here, the raters are not just going to lower you a complete level on your response. So these types of mistakes are actually quite minor. So I don't want anyone to stress out about them. We try our best to learn them. But again, don't worry too badly if you do make a mistake there. It's not a serious problem, all right? If you know the person's first name, we're still not going to use it. If you're using a title word, so these would be incorrect. You're not going to say, Dear Dr. Jennifer, or Dear Mr. Carlos Garcia. If you're using that title word at all, it always goes with the last name only, not a first name for that particular situation. So just try to memorize that rule if you can. It should serve you well, again, in the real world, not just for CELPIP, I hope. Okay, now if you're writing to a woman, I point this out because as a woman myself, I get lots of interesting emails with different title words. So I'm going to show you how to do this correctly. If you're writing to a woman, the best title word to use is MS period. This is Ms. So you would say, Dear Ms. Chopra, or Dear Ms. Schmidt. This is the person's last name only, again. All right, Ms. is neutral. It just indicates any female at all. We do not want to use the title words Mrs. or Miss. Mrs. indicates the woman is married. Miss indicates the woman is single. And again, it would be considered impolite to write to a woman, especially if you don't know them well, and start to try to assume their marital status. So we don't want to write emails that start with Dear Mrs. Asadi or Dear Miss Wong. It's much better to use Ms. because you can't go wrong. You're addressing a woman in general. So I would encourage you, please, to use that MS period. Okay, last but not least, if you know the person well, obviously you can use their first name. This is very casual. So you might say, Dear Jasmine, hi Gurpreet, something like that would work. You notice you still put a comma after the greeting. But again, if it's a stranger or just somebody you don't know all that well, and I imagine on the CELPIP test, this is probably more the case, you're going to go back to that formal structure that we reviewed earlier. So Dear Mr. K, for example. So again, I just remind everyone that it is actually considered impolite in Canadian context anyway, to address a stranger by their first name. So we just don't do that. We use their last name to show respect. All right, now if you don't know the name of the person, like in the email example we looked at today here, you can use their title. So in the grocery store example, we could simply say, Dear Manager. You notice we've got a capital letter M there, so that's fine. For the attention of the teacher, or to whom it may concern. All of those are fine when you don't know who you're writing to. What I'm going to ask you though to do is not to use the word dear all by itself when you're writing. Again, from a Canadian context, when we say dear, it's actually a term of endearment. It shows affection for a loved one. And it's usually used by an older family member. So for example, my grandmother used to call me dear when I was a young child. So in that context, it's okay. But when we're writing emails, it would be unusual and inappropriate to address a manager as dear. It's like you're showing them affection and love, which I think would be inappropriate in the context of the email that we're writing. So again, don't use that one. Use any of the other options we talked about. Anyway, so that's enough about greetings and sign-offs. We do our best to get that right, but don't stress out if you don't quite get it right on your test. It's not going to lower you too much in your score. But let's move on to some larger issues that we need to fix. So it's the same question. We're still looking at the fact that you've gone to the grocery store, you've been overcharged. And as a reminder, we're supposed to write to explain the problems with the food that we purchased, why we can't come to the store, and how we want the manager to solve the problem. So we've now talked at length about the readability dimension here. So we've looked at how to properly paragraph, and we've also looked how to format some of the aspects of the email. So we're going to switch gears now. I'm going to show you a different response to the same question. And I'd like you to try to figure out if the issue is more with the content, with the vocabulary, or even with the task fulfillment. So here's the response. Again, it's a level 8 response. This is the score that this person achieved. Okay, so have a quick look. And before anyone points out the greeting is wrong, I'm going to fix it really quickly. So you see the greeting here says, Dear Sir, Madam. We can't do that either. If you're addressing a man or a woman, we need to indicate it's an option here, or. So Dear Sir or Madam. There, so I fixed the greeting. That's not the problem. I hope that we located. Anyway, can you take about 10 or 15 seconds? Again, see if you can figure out the issue. Feel free to share ideas, and Ashwati can share any that might come in there.
Hi, Randy. I'm here.
Yes.
We haven't received any responses yet. I'm just going to wait for a couple seconds. If you are thinking there is some error here, please do share it here. You don't have to worry about whether it's right or wrong. Okay, I'm going to share Mohammed's suggestion here. He says word count.
Yes, thank you so much, Mohammed. I was going to give you a hint if nobody came up with that on their own. Yeah, the word count is really low, way too low. So you're supposed to achieve at least 150, probably closer to 200 words. So you can see this one's only 126 words. So the word count itself is assessed under the task fulfillment area. But the way to fix the word count, of course, is to add more words and more details. So we're going to do sort of 2 corrections at once. I think if we really focus on the content, so when you look at all the elements here that the raters are looking for, you look at that bottom line that says examples and supporting details. If we can add more examples into this email to indicate exactly which grocery items we purchased and what the prices were and what the bill total that was wrong, all of those details, that's going to elevate the word count. It's going to get us into the correct range, but it's also going to improve content because we'll actually be giving more supporting details, which will simply just create a more descriptive, interesting, and higher quality response. So I'm just going to take us through the first paragraph of this response. I think that's the easiest way to fix this. So I'll just read as we go and point out some things. So after the greeting, this email says, after visiting your store today. So right away, I'm just going to pause there for a moment. This makes sense. The idea does make sense. But the word store is a very general, common, everyday word that we might use. This type of language is very common at the level 8 level anyway. And this response did achieve a level 8. So instead of saying your store, can we just make it more interesting and actually create the name of a grocery store? Be very precise and specific. You can use one from your own neighborhood if you like. So Sobeys was a grocery store in my hometown in Ontario. It's the first one that came to my mind, so that's the one that I included in here. We have, after visiting Sobeys supermarket today, I realized I was overcharged for a number of items I purchased. So once again, the idea makes sense. We understand there's been an overcharge, but all it says here is a number of items. That's really general. It's very vague. It's rather boring. So this type of general language, as I say, it's more typical at the level 8, I'd say. To elevate into the level 9 and higher, we're wanting to demonstrate a bigger variety, but just more precision. So even adjusting this and saying, I was overcharged for a number of groceries I purchased. It's much more specific now. We have a better picture of what's going on. Now to start that second sentence, you'll see that I've already inserted a little transition to get us started. So I've got for example, and this is where we're going to add in even 3 examples of some of the grocery items we purchased. If we can indicate maybe what the price we were supposed to pay was and what we were actually charged. This is the type of detail for this question that's going to help us get into the word count. Okay, so just for time's sake today, I'm going to quickly share some of the ideas that I came up with. All right, I'll just read out loud here what I've inserted in green. So it says, for example, apples were advertised in the flyer for 99 cents per pound, but I was charged $1.99 per pound instead. Frozen turkeys were supposed to be $1.29 a pound, but I was incorrectly charged $3.99 a pound. I only purchased 1 blueberry pie, but the cashier accidentally charged me twice for this item. In total, my bill was an extra $34 more than it should have been. Okay, so all of that, very specific, very on topic, so it's suitable because I'm supposed to be talking about the problems with the groceries anyway and the price. So all of this so far is getting us into the proper word count and improving content. When we continue to read what was initially there, do you see the next sentence there after the green? It says, these items were supposed to be cheaper than the price I paid. Well, we don't need that anymore because we've already illustrated in a lot of detail what the price should have been for each item. So we're just going to take that sentence out. And then when we continue reading, it says, once I realized the error, I called the store immediately to explain. So this is a new idea, right? So we're just going to move that down into a separate paragraph. So this is much more effective. You've now got your opening paragraph all about the problems, and then the next 2 points are discussed below that in separate paragraphs. And magically, there's our word count. So by adding in those green words, those few sentences, we're now in a healthy range. We've got 184 words. So we've actually corrected that little task fulfillment mistake with word count. And we've also, more importantly, I think, really elevated those examples and supporting details for that response. So that's a really good way to do it. Okay, so far we've looked at readability. Remember, we talked about paragraph structure and email format. We've just finished talking about task fulfillment with the word count and also the content with those specific details. So that leaves us just with vocabulary. So I've got one last response to this exact same question that I'd really like to go over with you today. And it's going to be something to do with vocabulary. So remember, the raters want to make sure that the words you're using are correct and suitable for the task, but they also want you to have a nice variety of words. We don't want to just repeat ourselves over and over again. All right, so I'm going to show you the last response for today. This one earned a level 9 on the CELPIP test, by the way. So this is getting into a higher level. Level 9 means effective communication. But there are some weaknesses, I think, with the vocab. So again, I'll mute myself for about 10-15 seconds and I'll give you a chance to read this through. But let's see if anybody can spot the weakness. It's a bit tricky, this one, I think.
Hi, Brandy. I'm just here to keep you company.
Thanks. This one is a little tricky to spot. I will be very impressed if anybody comes up with it on their first guess. Okay, I'm going to make one quick correction. I should have done this first, I guess. I noticed there were no paragraphs in the first part, so let's just correct that now and get that out of the way. But there's still something with the vocabulary.
Two people suggested paragraph structure before you corrected it. I just want to tell them that you guys were right. There was a mistake, but that's not the one that Brandy's looking for. But yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. So we've already talked about paragraphs and you got it. Yeah, all we had to do was separate the big paragraph into two. So that was an easy fix, but very important. All right.
I think they've got it, Brandy. I think it's this. Somebody says, dear manager.
That one's actually okay. The greeting here is okay. Yeah. So yeah, no, nice guess. The greeting's okay. I'm going to give you a hint because I've color coded my next slide. All right. So let me show you it first, and then I know I have the title up too, but hopefully you can see the point I'm trying to make. So do you see the words in green there? We've got the word overcharged 3 times. So we've repeated the use of that word too many times. We don't have a good variety. And what's more, that word overcharged, it's not our own vocabulary. The word overcharged was actually on the test instructions. So not only have we repeated ourselves, we've actually borrowed or copied right from the test itself. So we're really not showcasing to the raters that we do have our own strong vocabulary. Okay, and the other problem I noticed with the repetitive language is that word store. You can see it's been used 5 times, and the word store on its own is already a pretty common and everyday word. So we can do better than that. We need more variety. We also want more precision, more specific ideas. So if you look at that first sentence there, where it says, I'm writing this letter to let you know about the overcharged items. Can we just rewrite that? So I'm writing to let you know that I was charged too much for items that I bought. Meaning is exactly the same, but now we're using our own vocabulary, so that's the better way to go. And this person again just says, I bought these groceries in your store today. So once again, let's just be a little more interesting and descriptive. Just create the name of a grocery store or use one from your neighborhood. Food Basics is another one from my hometown. So that's why I included that one there. Okay, so we've fixed up, I guess, that first line. If you look to the bottom of that same paragraph, the sentence structure is a bit off anyway, but we've used the word overcharged. It says, so there is an overcharge on what's supposed to be the original price. So we need to think of a different way to express that without changing the meaning. Let's just rewrite the whole sentence. So my bill is much higher than it should be. There, that makes sense. And you'll notice now that in that first paragraph, those green expressions mean the same, but the language is different. So we're not getting into that repetitive pattern, which is great. Okay, now for probably the more important revision in that second paragraph, we can't use the word store that many times. It's too much. So rather than say, I called your store to talk about this matter, would it be accurate to say, I called your customer service department? That would at least give us some variety. In the second line, she says, unfortunately, I can't make it back as it takes an hour for me to drive before reaching your store. And at that time, your store will be closed. So I suggest we can keep the word store in the first instance and just replace it with the pronoun it to follow. So she says, before reaching your store and it will be closed before I get there. So I think to use the word store once is okay, but we don't want to do it 5 times. In the next line, we've got, would you please meet me tomorrow in your store? Again, let's just go back to the title, or the name of the store rather. Please meet me tomorrow at Food Basics and I will bring my receipt. Now, I know we've got the name of the store in the opening, Food Basics. I think it's okay to refer to the store by name again towards the end of the email. We didn't use that word in the same sentence, so it doesn't sound so repetitive. And it is the name of the store after all, so it makes sense that you could use it a few times throughout this response. So that's better. And the last sentence there in green, I think we can just leave it, to be very honest. You can make a refund on what had been overcharged in my grocery items. So yeah, the word overcharge comes from the test, but really we're only using it here once. So I think we can just leave it in for now. I think it does the trick. Okay, now there are some other little grammar and writing mistakes in there and so on. But the one vocabulary skill I really wanted to target today is this repetitive vocab. I see it quite often on different sample responses coming in. So we need to make sure that we're using a variety to the best of our ability anyway. So to summarize, I guess, the 4 errors that we talked about today, I know there are many more, but we really focused in on this one first and foremost, If you do nothing else, please learn how or understand how to paragraph your answer appropriately. Again, it's just so much easier to read when we see how all those main points are organized. So one main idea goes in one paragraph. If you have a different idea to discuss, that goes in a separate paragraph below, and so on. On your CELPIP test, you'll probably have anywhere from 3 to 4 paragraphs on each writing task. Again, it depends on how many ideas you want to discuss. So there's no rule for that, but I can certainly tell you, you should not be submitting one giant paragraph. That would be wrong no matter what you do. Okay, and again, we did look today at creating that appropriate sign-off and the greeting for the email. So we're looking at structure too, so capital letters and punctuation too. The word count is important. We need to make sure we've got enough specific details too in order to paint a complete picture for the reader and to make the writing descriptive and interesting as well. And last but not least, we finished up by looking at vocabulary and just making sure that we had a nice range, a good variety of words and expressions so that we didn't repeat ourselves over and over again. So that is it for now. So a pretty good head start maybe on some of your studies at home. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to come back to you. So there I am. All right. If we have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them now.
We do have other questions. So the one thing that I just wanted to get clarified right away, because a couple of people suggested that the last time you were checking for vocabulary in Mary's response, you did mention that there were some other spelling errors, but I just wanted to get it out of the way. In Dear Manager, manager was capitalized, and please let us know if that's okay or not. And then in the ending, yours sincerely, Y and S were both or your something regard, both were capitalized. I don't remember exactly what the greeting was, but they both the letters were capitalized for the words. So if you could just clarify that, that would be great.
Okay, yeah. So when you're saying Dear Manager, you're using the word manager as the person's name. You're substituting the name out for that title. So think of it that way, and we know that names actually start with a capital letter. So that's why in that instance, you're going to put a capital M on the word manager, Dear Manager. If you're going to phrase it like she did in her email, she said, for the attention of the manager. She's now creating a clause or a phrase. So she's no longer using the word manager to represent that person's name. Does that make sense? English is tough this way in the sense that there are nuances. It's how you're using the word that's going to dictate the rules. Okay, so Dear Manager, capital. If you're using a phrase, you would not need to put capital letters there at all. You would only put a capital on the beginning word. So for the attention, capital F. Now, as for the end closing, if you're just using one word, like sincerely, that's going to have a capital S. If it's two words, like best regards, you only put a capital on the first word, best. The second word there, regards, would not have a capital letter. Yeah, so these are good ones to try to sort out in your mind. And again, I do know, just again, from doing so many webinars, it's stressful. We literally, this is probably the most asked question we get on all of the writing is, how do I do my sign up? How do I do my greeting? These are important, yes, but please do not stress. If you accidentally put a capital where it's not meant to be, it's not going to change your score as long as you do better on everything else. All right, so for example, if you don't do any paragraphs and you don't put capitals on your sentences and so on, that's a bigger mistake to fix, right? So it's all relative. I encourage you to think of it that way too.
Thank you. Here's another question. It's more of a clarification of something you already went over earlier. I'm not sure if I understand what was just said about Mrs. If you know the person is married, wouldn't you use Mrs.?
You will only use Mrs. if you know that person wants to be addressed as Mrs. Okay, so again, even if you knew they were married, it's not as common nowadays for women to use the title of their marital status as their identity. Most women, not all, most women are more comfortable with the very neutral Ms. MS period. So as I say, you will not go wrong with that. If you know someone really well and they want to be addressed as Mrs. Smith, absolutely, you know that they're comfortable with that, you can use that. But I would, for the vast majority of instances, you'll probably be going with Ms. Yeah, it's just more customary It's more common and it's more appropriate in the context of emailing, particularly in this business culture, right? It's different when you're emailing a boss or a manager of a store versus a good friend of yours. You really do need to pay attention to the formality when you're addressing these people so you don't offend them. That's the biggest thing.
I hope that answered your question, Nisha. So we have a few more questions about word count. If I remember correctly, the last one, Mary's answer was 7 words over the required word count. A lot of people have questions about how much is allowed, so if you could just go over that again.
Absolutely. So on the test instructions, they do say 150 to 200 words. I will let you in on a secret. The raters are flexible and they will give you 10% leeway above or underneath that word count. So if we do the math, 10% of 150, you go under that. You could effectively write 135 words. And then if it's 10% over the 200, that would give you up to 220 words. So again, technically, if you're somewhere in the 135 to 220 word range, that's fine. You're not going to lose marks for task fulfillment. But here's the problem. If you're only writing 135 words, you probably have not added enough specific detail to really give a full descriptive and interesting account, right? So again, looking at the example where we added in those green sentences about food today, that response was 126 words. Pretty close to 135, right? Which would be the bare minimum, but it was very simple as it was. So I think going closer to 200, regardless of the bottom end of the word count, is probably going to be your friend anyway. It just gives you more opportunity to give more supporting examples. And that's just really going to elevate the quality and the interest level of your writing, I'd say.
Thank you, Brandy. Also, for those of you watching, please don't spam the comment section with your questions. I will get to it. If I haven't answered it, it's because it's not relevant to the current episode, or it has been answered before by Brandy within the episode. So please go back and watch it. But otherwise, I will get to your question.
All right. Do we have any other questions today?
We have quite a few questions. I'm just trying to see if there is one that, okay. So Anu has a few questions. One of them is, what's a good sign-off in an informal email? And then this is relevant, I think, for the moment. Can you put, I think they mean, can you put the / instead of or?
Yeah, so Anu, we looked at an example sort of like that today in the email. You should not be using a slash. If you want to go sir and madam, it's an either or. So dear sir or madam, that's the only way to do that. Don't put a comma, don't put a dash, don't put anything else. It has to be the words, dear sir or madam, comma. And that's how you're going to do that one. As far as an informal email goes, if you're writing to a friend, quite frankly, if it's just a friend, half of us probably don't even use a sign off at all, right? Like Ashwati and I know each other really well. If I email her, I'm not going to say sincerely and kind regards because we know each other well. I'll probably just sign my name at the bottom, so that would be okay. For CELPIP, you're likely writing somebody that you don't know well. And most of the examples that we look at, you'll notice it's a restaurant manager, it's a teacher, it's a guest speaker for a classroom, whatever it happens to be. So you're very likely going to use something generic like regards or sincerely or even best. Yeah, sometimes we can put thank you only if it's something like if we've made a request and asked that person to do something. At the end, we might just say thank you or thanks and sign your name. That would be a little bit less casual or less formal, I mean, as well, I think.
Okay, thank you. Okay. We're still getting questions about addressing people, so I'm going to share one from Zulfikar.
Did I not predict this would happen? This is the most common questions we get about writing mistakes are the greetings and the sign-offs. And I'm happy to answer these questions, but I'm worried that you're all worried that this is a big deal. And it's really not. It's really not that important. So again, I'm happy to answer the questions. But if you're studying at home, it's so much more important to make sure you know how to do proper sentence structure, proper paragraph skills, and you elevate your vocab. So that's just my disclaimer, but we'll get into these other questions now.
I think the question, you answered this question, Brandy, so feel free to keep it short. Is it important to use Mr. or Miss before the name of a person? Can we use name only, like Dear Richard or Dear Sam?
You would only ever use the name only if you know them well. Yeah, it's a colleague you work with every day and you know them, and it's a very casual relationship there at work, that's great. Again, if it's somebody in a position of authority, somebody you don't know well, you should absolutely use the title word Mr. or Ms. It shows respect and it shows consideration as well. If you address somebody too casually, you risk offending them. And the very first thing they see on your email is the greeting. So if they're already offended when they see your greeting, they're probably not going to be too open to what you have to say. So just be careful about who you're addressing and how you do it for sure. Yeah, so Tarang, I can see your comment. Please don't do that. Don't say hi, manager. Hi is far too casual. You say hi to friends, you would not address a manager with the word hi. It shows lack of respect for that person. So you don't say hey. I get that too sometimes. I get emails from students I've never met. Hey, Brandy. And I'm not the type that would get offended, but that's not appropriate, right? So if you don't know somebody, it's dear so-and-so, or yeah. Please don't use hi too casual.
Okay, I think we've gone through all permutation and combinations of addressing people. So I see some more questions. Afshin, your question about putting forward slash and addressing Mr. Madam Manager has already been answered. So please, I will be moving on to other questions. Okay, here is one from Nick. Would you lose points if you spell something different, but it's correct in my region?
North America. Oh, I see. Yeah, you're talking about, say, like British spelling patterns versus American versus Canadian. I will say that, I mean, the CELPIP is a Canadian test, so why not learn the Canadian spellings? That would be my first suggestion. It's not often hard, just to really, like, if you're going to use a Z or an S, it's not really a big adjustment. If you insist on using a British spelling, because maybe that's what you're accustomed to, that's fine, but you have to be consistent. So if you start using that particular spelling pattern, just use it all the way through the test. Don't start flip-flopping back and forth and using different combinations, right? Yeah, so fair question, I think, to ask.
Okay, thank you, Brandy. I just wanted to share this. I don't know if you guys saw it before, but I'm going to share it again. Arkham got 12 in writing and is thanking you, Brandy. And
that's fantastic, Arkham. Congratulations. Woo! 12 in writing. That's huge. That's really tough to get. I know a lot of people who English is their first language, and it's hard for them to get a 12. So you must have very strong skills. I'm very proud of you. Way to go.
Okay, here's another question from Dr. Mohammed. Is it good to use phrasal verbs in writing?
Phrasal verbs, I'll just clarify what those are, first of all, just in case somebody's maybe not familiar with that term. A phrasal verb is when you use a preposition and a verb together to convey meaning. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. I have a terrible example. If you're not feeling well, this is the first one that comes to mind, so I apologize for the example. If you're not feeling very well and you're sick, you might say, I threw up, right? Like that's when you're not feeling well. So that's an example of a phrasal verb. The word throw is the action part. Up is a preposition. It's showing a location, a place. When you put those two words together, they create a particular meaning. Phrasal verbs tend to be a lot more, I wouldn't say a lot, more casual and more common. So again, it always comes down to who you're writing. If you're trying to create a more formal tone, if you're addressing a manager, I myself would probably avoid using phrasal verbs. I would try to use more interesting active verbs instead. But again, if it's someone you know well and you're not too worried about that formality, then I would say they're okay as well. Yeah, like just one example that comes to mind. You could say, I learned many skills as I was studying. So that's just a very common idea that's easy to understand. If you were to say, I picked up a lot of skills while learning, those two ideas mean the same thing. If you pick something up, in that case, it does indicate learning. But if I say I picked up, it's just very casual, right? And again, I learned is the more formal version. So you'll need to decide, I guess, who you're writing and what tone is appropriate for the task. Good question. Yeah.
Do you recommend that if there are 3 points of discussion, then should we concentrate on 3 paragraphs?
That's a good question. I don't have a definite answer for you. I will say it's a good guideline as a starting base. Oftentimes, if there are those 3 bulleted points in the question, quite often you can turn them each into their own paragraph. But in the example we looked at today, it's a little bit about how you formulate your ideas on the page. So you remember the final 2 bulleted points said, explain why you can't go to the store and ask for the solution. I think if you phrase those and express those as a cause and effect relationship, those could easily be combined into one paragraph. And in fact, that's what the first test taker did. So if you keep it brief and just said, you know, the store is an hour drive away from me. I don't have time to come back today. So instead, if I were to come to the store tomorrow, could we meet then? And could you issue the refund at that time? So in that case, because those ideas are so closely connected, they could go easily into one paragraph. So again, it's a judgment call on yourself, the writer. So yeah, whoever said language is easy was not thinking clearly. There's a lot of foresight that goes into it. There's not really a shortcut. There's no steadfast rules that we can just learn and apply to every situation. So it's always a judgment call on you. Is this the main idea? Okay, am I finished talking about it? If I have a new idea that's completely different, that's when I start my next paragraph. So a little bit on how you connect your ideas there together too.
Thank you, Randy. Here's another one. This is about, it's relevant here because at the moment we're talking about writing and we're talking about scores, but this is about the sample responses we have on our website.
Okay.
Sample level 12 looks very simple with minimal high vocabulary. Can we rely on those sample responses, or do we need to have professional writing?
Yeah, so I didn't talk about this today because I just wanted to focus on individual errors. This is a complex question, but I'll do my best to answer it in a sort of condensed version. So the scores that you get on your responses in general, they come from those 4 categories we talked about. So yes, the raters are looking to see your content details, so how many specific examples you've got and how well they're organized. Yes, they want to see strong vocabulary. They also want to see paragraph structure, strong grammar, sentence structure, things like that. And they also want to make sure that you've answered the question with the right word count. So all 4 of those things have to be done. The raters are going to assess you based on a combination of the skills that you are demonstrating in each of those areas. So I obviously we can't see this particularly level 12 that is it U12 maybe is talking about, so we can't point out any examples. It's possible maybe that this response you're citing does have a slightly weaker skill set in the vocabulary. But if that person demonstrated really sound content details, they got a main point, lots of supporting details for each main point, sentence structure is complex, there's a variety, lots of conjunctions are used, they've answered the question, everything else is really high level, then it's very possible to achieve that high score. So again, the rating process isn't, it's not an individual thing, it's an all or nothing, it's a package deal, I should say, right? So you can't just expect to demonstrate high skills in one area and achieve that level 12. We have to work at skills across the board here. Does that make sense? Yeah, we never just look at one area when we're giving the score.
Thank you. Ujjwal, please let us know if that answer helped you. I think we're coming towards the end of our questions here, Brandy. Okay, here's one. How do you rate your improvised letter?
Oh, I have no idea. Ambesh, are you probably talking about that email that I added those green sentences in, I think? Yeah, again, I don't know. I'm not a rater, so I don't have the professional certification and training to offer up rating ideas. What we can say is that adding in those specific details definitely improve the quality of the response, particularly in the content areas. So that much we can definitely say with confidence. But yeah, since my revision, if you will, hasn't been rated, I really don't know what it would score. And keeping in mind, I only added in those 3 sentences. I didn't touch the rest of the email. So there were some other little grammar mistakes and things there that would need to be taken into account. So sorry, I can't offer you a rating idea, but just know that those ideas are going to add value because they're more specific and show variety.
Okay, last question for the day. Divya asks, can we write idioms in the letter?
I probably wouldn't. I mean, again, idiomatic language is very casual. So again, this is the same as using phrasal verbs. It's a judgment call on yourself as the writer. So if you are writing a casual message and you're not worried about your tone, then I'd say they'd be fine if you're writing to a friend. But in a situation like the one we talked about today, if you're writing a manager, I probably would not use idiomatic language. I fear that would decrease the tone and make it a bit too casual. So yeah, you've got to decide who you're writing to, what's your purpose, what tone do you want to convey. So easy bet would be to shy away from them, I think, at least for CELPIP, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Randy. I think we've gone over a good set of questions. Please watch this video again, and if you think we still haven't answered your questions, please feel free to leave a comment after the live is over. We'll come back and probably answer later if we find that it has been unanswered before. But thank you so much for joining us, Brandy.
All right, thanks. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. So that was Brandy. I also wanted to let you guys know something important while I have you here. This episode is our second last episode for the time being. Our last episode will be on July 20th, and we're doing reading section part 2. After that, we will be taking a break. But during the break, we will be talking about what to do with CELPIP Live next. So feel free to leave your suggestions in the comments as well. What you'd like to see more of, what would you like Brandy to talk about? Is there anything else outside of CELPIP tests that you want us to explore? Please let us know in the comments below, and we will incorporate it in our conversation. I haven't forgotten about the trivia question, even though I don't think I saw anybody answer it. So here goes. The question was, Canada has 5 different colored banknotes. What are the colors? So that's blue, purple, green, red, and gold. Wow, I did not know there was a gold one. Blue, purple, green, red, and gold. That's the answer. If any of you answered and I missed it, I apologize, but I don't think you guys answered it. Nope. Anyway, makes sense. Brandy's lesson was more interesting. But thank you so much, guys, for joining us, and we will see you next time.